Detective Eliza Monroe was no stranger to eerie cases, but this was different. She had been called to investigate a series of missing persons in the remote town of Black Hollow, nestled deep within a forest that locals avoided at all costs. The air there was thick with fear, carrying rumors of ancient giants that roamed the woods, a legend dismissed by the rational, but whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to believe. The first body was found on a cold February night. It was barely recognizable as human. Limbs were twisted, bones shattered like dry twigs, and the torso was hollow. Something had scooped out the organs with surgical precision. Blood soaked the ground, painting a gruesome picture of violence. But there was no sign of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to explain. What had done this? Eliza stared at the remains, her stomach churning, but her gut told her there was something unnatural at play. That's when she heard it, a faint, raspy whisper like the wind brushing against her ear. The giants, they are hungry. Eliza froze. She whipped her head around, but the woods were still, silent. The officers standing nearby didn't seem to hear it. The voice returned, louder this time. They took me. They will take more. The next night, another body was found. This one was worse. The victim's skull had been cracked open like an egg, the brain missing, and jagged claw marks ran down what was left of their torso. The remains looked as though they had been gnawed on, teeth marks, like massive blades carved into the bones. Eliza couldn't sleep. The whispers followed her everywhere now, growing louder, more frantic. They spoke of giants, creatures as tall as trees, with skin like stone and glowing red eyes that pierced the darkness. The voice begged her to stop them, to uncover their lair before it was too late. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the evidence, but the whispers guided her deeper into the case. They told her to go to the forest, to the cursed ruins that no one dared to enter. With a team of officers, Eliza ventured into the heart of Black Hollow. It was a moonless night. Their flashlights barely penetrated the suffocating darkness. The deeper they went, the more they felt it, an oppressive, bone-deep sense of dread, as if the forest itself was alive and watching them. Then they found it, a massive cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. The entrance was carved with symbols that looked ancient and alien, depicting towering figures tearing apart smaller, human-like shapes. Bloodstains, fresh and still glistening, trailed inside. Eliza's radio crackled, static. Then a voice, not one of her officers, but the same ghostly whisper that had haunted her for days. They are inside, waiting. Run. Before she could respond, a deafening roar erupted from the cave. Something massive moved in the shadows, shaking the ground beneath their feet. One officer screamed as a colossal hand, a grotesque mix of flesh and rock, with claws as long as swords, shot out of the darkness and grabbed him. Blood sprayed across the cave walls as the giant crushed him like a bug. More figures emerged, their glowing red eyes illuminating the cavern. They were monstrous, at least 20 feet tall, with jagged teeth dripping with gore. The giants moved with terrifying speed, their heavy footsteps reverberating like thunder. They didn't just kill, they devoured. Eliza fired her weapon, but it was useless. Bullets ricocheted off their stone-like skin. One of the giants lunged at her, its claws narrowly missing her head as she drove to the ground. She scrambled to her feet and ran, the horrifying sounds of her team being torn apart echoing behind her. Eliza made it out of the forest alive, but barely. Bloodied and traumatized, she knew she couldn't leave it at that. The whispers hadn't stopped. They grew angrier, urging her to return, to destroy the giants before they claimed more lives. She dug through historical records, uncovering the dark truth about Black Hollow. Centuries ago, the giants had been sealed away by the town's ancestors after a massacre that wiped out hundreds. But the seal had weakened over time, and the creatures had awakened, hungrier than ever. The whispers led her to an ancient artifact hidden in the ruins of an old church, a weapon forged specifically to kill the giants. It was a jagged blade, heavy and stained with the blood of those who had wielded it before. Armed with the blade and a newfound resolve, Eliza returned to the forest. This time, she wasn't running. She was going to end it. The giants were waiting for her, their massive forms looming in the darkness. They roared, their voices shaking the earth, but Eliza didn't flinch. The whispers guided her every move. When one of the giants lunged, she dodged and drove the blade into its chest. The weapon glowed, pulsing with an otherworldly light, and the creature let out an ear-splitting scream as it crumbled to ash. One by one, she fought them, the blade slicing through their stone-like skin as if it were paper. Blood, thick, black, and foul-smelling, splattered across the cave walls. The giants fought back savagely, their claws raking her flesh. But she didn't stop. Finally, only one remained, the largest of them all, its eyes burning with fury. It spoke, its voice like grinding rocks. "You cannot stop the hunger." With a final desperate surge of strength, Eliza drove the blade into its skull. The giant let out a deafening roar before collapsing, its massive body shaking the ground as it fell. The forest was silent. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie calm. Eliza staggered out of the cave, covered in blood, both hers and the giant's. She had won, but at a cost. She would never forget the screams, the blood, or the monstrous faces of the giants she had slain. Black Hollow was safe, for now. But Eliza knew the giants were only part of the darkness lurking in the world. The whispers had warned her. More will come. And when they did, she would be ready. This chilling tale of giants, gore, and ghostly whispers is not for the faint of heart. What did you think? Would you face the giants, or would you heed the whispers and run? Eliza thought it was over. She thought the giants were dead. But the night after her return from the forest, as she bandaged her wounds and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her bathroom, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Her eyes, her once warm hazel eyes, had changed. They were red, glowing. Her heart raced as she backed away from the mirror. The whispers returned, louder and more menacing this time. They weren't guiding her anymore. They were mocking her. The voice that had once begged for help now hissed venomous words into her ears. "You killed them, but you'll never escape. The hunger is inside you now." Suddenly, a sharp pain ripped through her chest. She collapsed under the cold tile floor, gasping for air as an unbearable heat spread through her veins. She clawed at her skin, desperate to stop the burning sensation, but it only grew worse. It was as if her very blood was boiling, turning her body into something unnatural. Then came the visions. She saw herself in the woods again, but this time she wasn't hunting the giants. She was one of them. Her hands, no, claws, were drenched in blood, gripping the lifeless body of a man whose screams still echoed in the air. She watched in horror as her monstrous self tore into the body, ripping out chunks of flesh and devouring them with animalistic hunger. She snapped back to reality, vomiting on the floor as the images faded. The whispers were laughing now. You thought you could stop the hunger? Fool, you are the hunger. Eliza became a prisoner in her own home. She locked herself inside, covering every mirror, every reflective surface, so she wouldn't have to see what she was becoming. But it didn't help. The changes were undeniable. Her nails, once short and clean, had grown into jagged claws. Her teeth were sharper, her skin grayer, and her body was racked with constant gnawing hunger. And the hunger wasn't for food. The whispers returned every night, louder and more insistent. They spoke of blood, of flesh, of the thrill of the hunt. Eliza fought it with everything she had, but the hunger was relentless. Her stomach churned, her throat burned, and her hands trembled with the desire to tear something apart. The first time she lost control, it was small. A stray dog had wandered into her yard, barking incessantly. The sound grated on her nerves like nails on a chalkboard. Before she realized what she was doing, she was outside, crouched over the animal, her claws buried in its fur. The poor creature yelped in pain as she tore into it, blood spraying across her face. When it was over, she stared at the mangled corpse in horror, her mouth dripping with blood. She wiped her face with trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. But deep down, she felt it, satisfaction. The hunger had been sated, if only for a moment. The next night, the hunger returned, stronger. She couldn't stay locked away anymore. She needed something bigger, something human. Eliza wandered the streets of Black Hollow under the cover of darkness, her glowing red eyes hidden beneath the brim of a hood. The town was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes when people are too scared to leave their homes. They had heard the rumors about the giants, about the cursed forest, about the detective who had survived when no one else had. She found her prey in an alleyway, a man stumbling home from the bar, too drunk to notice the shadowy figure following him. Her heart pounded as she closed the distance, her claws twitching with anticipation. The whispers screamed in her ears. Feed, feed. She didn't even give him time to scream. Her claws slashed through his back, severing his spine in one clean motion. He collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath him as he tried to crawl away. Eliza pounced on him, flipping him onto his back and sinking her teeth into his throat. The warm, coppery taste of blood filled her mouth, and for the first time in days, the hunger subsided. She didn't stop. She tore into him with a ferocity that didn't feel human, ripping flesh from bone, devouring every piece of him until there was nothing left but a bloody smear on the pavement. When it was over, she sat back, her hands shaking as she stared at the carnage. She wanted to vomit, to scream, to claw her own skin off. But the whispers wouldn't let her. They praised her. Good, so good. But it's not enough. You'll need more. Black Hollow descended into chaos. People began disappearing nightly, their bloodied remains found scattered across the town. Some bodies were missing limbs. Others were nothing more than piles of shredded meat. The town's residents whispered about the return of the giants, but no one suspected Eliza after all. She was their hero, the woman who had saved them from the monsters. But Eliza knew the truth. She wasn't saving anyone. She was the monster now. The hunger grew stronger with each passing day, and soon, one victim a night. The hunger grew stronger with each passing day, and soon, one victim a night wasn't enough. Eliza's body ached with need, her mind unraveling under the weight of what she had become. She tried to fight it, tried chaining herself to the radiator in her basement, but it was useless. The hunger gave her unnatural strength, snapping the chains like brittle twigs. And every time she thought she could resist, the whispers came back, louder, angrier, demanding more. You can't stop this. You don't want to stop this. Feed, Eliza. Feed and be free. One night, she woke up covered in blood, not just her hands, but her entire body, dripping crimson in thick, sticky layers. Her shirt was shredded, her jeans soaked through. She didn't remember leaving the house, but the taste of iron lingered in her mouth, and her stomach felt full, too full. She stumbled out of bed, her breath catching in her throat as she realized she was holding something, a severed arm. It dropped to the floor with a sickening thud. Eliza fell to her knees, staring in horror at the limb. The skin was pale, the veins still faintly visible beneath the surface. A wedding ring glinted on the man's finger, now bent at an unnatural angle. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the blood smeared across her face. "No, no, no." She crawled to the bathroom, slipping on the blood that pooled around her feet. Her reflection greeted her in the mirror, horrific, monstrous, barely human anymore. Her eyes glowed like embers, her teeth jagged and dripping with gore. Her hair hung in matted clumps, and her skin was stretched too tightly across her face, as if her skull was trying to break free. She screamed, a guttural, animalistic sound that echoed through the house. Black Hollow's small church was packed that evening. The townspeople had gathered for a vigil, praying for protection from whatever evil had descended upon them. Candles flickered in trembling hands, casting shadows across the stained glass windows. Eliza watched from the woods, her glowing eyes locked on the church. She could hear their voices, their prayers, their fear. It was intoxicating. Her claws scraped against the bark of a tree as she crouched, saliva pooling in her mouth. The whispers were deafening now, a cacophony of voices screaming in her head. "Take them, all of them. Feed." She tried to resist. She bit down on her lip until blood trickled down her chin, her claws digging into the earth. "No," she muttered, shaking her head violently. I won't. But the hunger wouldn't be denied. It hit her like a tidal wave, drowning her in its relentless power. Her body moved on its own, sprinting toward the church doors with inhuman speed. She slammed into them, the force of her body splintering the wood and sending the congregation into a panicked frenzy. Screams filled the air as Eliza stepped inside, her monstrous form illuminated by the flickering candlelight. Her claws dripped with blood, her mouth twisted into a hideous grin. She could smell their terror, taste it in the air. The first victim was a young woman who tried to run past her. Eliza's claws caught her mid-stride, slicing through her back and sending her crumpling to the floor. Blood sprayed across the pews as Eliza ripped into her, tearing chunks of flesh from her body. The priest shouted, holding up a crucifix as he stepped forward. "Demon, leave this place." Eliza laughed, a deep, guttural sound that chilled the room. She lunged at him, her claws slashing through the air. The crucifix clattered to the ground as she pinned him to the altar, her teeth sinking into his throat. His blood spurted in thick, hot streams, painting the walls and floor in crimson. The congregation scattered, but there was no escape. Eliza moved faster than any human could, her claws tearing through flesh and bone with ease. One by one they fell, screaming, crying, begging for mercy. But mercy was a foreign concept to her now. She was a predator, and they were her prey. By morning, the church was silent. The pews were shattered, the altars stained with blood. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, their limbs twisted and broken, their faces frozen in expressions of pure terror. The air was thick with the metallic stench of death. Eliza stood in the center of the carnage, her chest heaving as she stared at what she had done. Blood dripped from her claws, her mouth, her hair. She was trembling, not with fear, but with satisfaction. The hunger was gone for now, replaced by a sickening sense of fulfillment. But as the sun rose, the whispers returned. "More," they said, softly at first. "More, Eliza, you'll never be free." She sank to her knees, her hands clutching her head as the voices grew louder. "No," she whimpered. "No, I can't do this anymore." "You don't have a choice," they hissed. "You are the hunger, you are the monster, and monsters don't stop until everything is gone." Her scream echoed through the empty church, a sound of pure despair. In the weeks that followed, Black Hollow became a ghost town. The streets were deserted, the windows boarded up. Those who hadn't been slaughtered fled, leaving behind only whispers of the monster that had once been their hero. Eliza roamed the ruins, her body barely recognizable as human anymore. Her claws were longer, her skin stretched so tightly it seemed on the verge of splitting. Her eyes burned like fire, and her teeth were permanently bared in a wicked snarl. She didn't resist the hunger anymore. There was no point. It controlled her now, driving her to hunt, to kill, to consume. And deep down, in the small, flickering remnants of her humanity, she knew there was no escape. The whispers were right. She was the hunger. The hunger pushed Eliza further and further until the town of Black Hollow became nothing more than a feeding ground, a barren wasteland of blood and bone. For weeks, no one dared return. The brave who ventured into the cursed town were never seen again, and soon even the whispers of Black Hollow's horrors began to fade from surrounding villages. It was a place the world quietly erased, a stain too dark to acknowledge. But Eliza remained. She stood on the outskirts of the forest, her body now fully transformed into something unholy. Her once human form had been consumed entirely. Her flesh was gray and cracked, pulsating with a sickly glow beneath the surface, as though fire burned just beneath her ruined skin. Her claws had grown into blackened talons that curved like scythes, and her teeth had turned jagged and uneven, built for tearing through bone. Her once red eyes blazed like twin infernos, visible even in the deepest dark. The human Eliza was gone. There was no question now. But the hunger remained. It was always there. It was her companion, her master, her purpose, and it was growing stronger. One night, under a blood-red moon, Eliza wandered into the woods. The whispers inside her head had gone quiet for the first time since the transformation. Something about the silence was more terrifying than the screams. It felt wrong. She stumbled deeper into the forest, her claws dragging against the bark of trees, carving deep grooves into their trunks. She stopped when she reached the edge of a clearing, her monstrous form silhouetted against the moonlight. That's when she heard it, A voice. Eliza. She froze. The voice was soft, familiar, cutting through the silence like a knife. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't mocking. It was human. She turned sharply, her glowing eyes scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" she growled, her voice guttural and distorted, barely recognizable as her own. The figure stepped into the clearing. It was a woman, her face pale but calm, her movements deliberate. She wore a tattered cloak, her hands folded in front of her. Despite the horror of Eliza's appearance, she didn't flinch. "It's me," the woman said. Eliza's heart, or what was left of it, lurched. The voice, the face. It was impossible. She stumbled backward, her claws slicing through the air defensively. "No, you're dead. I killed you." The woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You killed many of us," she said softly, "but I'm here now." It was the first giant Eliza had ever slain, the one who had begged for her life, her voice trembling with fear as Eliza's blade had pierced her chest. It had been the first kill that started all of this. And now she was standing there, alive. "No," Eliza whispered, clutching her head as the whispers returned, louder, more piercing than ever. "This is your fault," they screamed. You. The woman stepped closer, her face impossibly calm. "You thought you could kill us and walk away unscathed. You thought you could destroy what you didn't understand." Eliza roared, her claws slashing at the woman, but they passed through her like smoke. The woman didn't flinch. "This isn't your body anymore," the woman said. "It's ours. You are ours." Eliza stumbled back, her monstrous form twisting in agony as the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. Her claws scraped at her own flesh, trying to tear herself apart, but it was no use. The whispers were inside her, rooting her to the ground, forcing her to listen. "You thought the hunger was yours," the woman whispered. "No, Eliza, the hunger was always ours. We gave it to you. And now," the woman's face twisted into a hideous grin, her eyes glowing the same fiery red as Eliza's. "Now, we'll take it back." Eliza's body erupted in pain, fire coursing through her veins as her screams echoed through the forest. Her claws dug deep into her chest as her bones cracked and shifted, her form growing larger, more grotesque. Her skin split open like a rotting fruit, spilling black ichor onto the ground. She felt her body twisting, warping into something even more monstrous, something no longer bound by human form. Her spine arched unnaturally, jagged protrusions ripping through her back, like the broken wings of a fallen angel. Her jaw unhinged, stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows upon rows of teeth that glistened with fresh blood. Her hands, once claws, became massive, gnarled appendages tipped with talons longer than swords. Her legs lengthened, her feet splitting into hooves that burned the earth with every step. She was no longer Eliza. She wasn't even a monster. She was something worse. And she was starving. Black Hollow was only the beginning. The whispers had been right. The hunger couldn't be contained. It wasn't meant to stay in one town, one forest, one woman. It was a plague, a curse that spread like wildfire. Eliza, if she could still be called that, left the ruins of Black Hollow and ventured into the world beyond. Her presence was a harbinger of death, her monstrous form towering over villages and cities alike. Wherever she went, destruction followed. Entire towns were wiped from existence, their residents torn apart by her insatiable hunger. But it wasn't just her. The curse spread, infecting those who crossed her path. First, It was the survivors of her attacks, those who escaped with bite marks or claw wounds. They turned, their bodies twisting into smaller versions of the horror Eliza had become. Then it spread further, through whispers in the night, through nightmares that drove people mad. It wasn't long before the world realized what was happening. Governments fell. Armies were sent to stop her, but bullets and bombs were useless. Eliza tore through them like paper, her hunger driving her forward, unstoppable, unrelenting. The world burned. Cities became graveyards. The sky turned black with smoke. And still, the hunger grew. Years passed, but Eliza didn't stop. She couldn't. She'd become the embodiment of the hunger, a force of nature that could never be sated. She roamed an empty, broken world, her fiery eyes scanning the horizon for anything, anyone left to devour. One night, as she stood atop the ruins of a once great city, the whispers fell silent. For the first time in years, there was no voice in her head, no hunger gnawing at her insides. The silence was deafening, and it made her pause. She looked out at the horizon, at the dead, lifeless world she had created. There was nothing left. No humans. No giants. Nothing but ash and the echoes of her destruction. The whispers returned, but this time they weren't mocking. They weren't demanding. They were laughing. "You've done it," they said. "You've fed, and now there's nothing left." Eliza's massive, grotesque form shuddered. For the first time since her transformation, she felt something other than hunger. She felt empty. She threw back her head and screamed, a sound so loud, so raw, it split the sky. And then there was silence. The world was dead, and so was she. To see more such good stories, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon button so that you are the first to see such horror movie updates on our channel.